let's link that post as a great place to start this conversation.
Yeah.
I'm just reading it right now, but I'll put it into the novelty search and let's talk about this because it's all the hot drama in Bittensor today.
Sauce. Do we go cams on?
Yeah, okay, we can do cams on.
Yeah, we almost never do cams on, so yeah. Hello, everyone. This is what I look like. I'm Kara.
And I'm Cons.
Cams on. Yeah, so listen, let's get it started here, right? So we just recently posted, a few minutes ago, we posted this announcement, right? There's been some controversy recently regarding our subnet, right? And more particularly the challenge API being centralized. Why was the challenge API centralized? Why did we choose to do this? The idea was to prevent lookup attacks. Now, what we found and what was brought to us and the concerns brought to us is that because this API is centralized, it makes it very hard for people to know transparently if the verification mechanism is correct. And we hear you. And this is why we asked OpenTensor to reduce our weight on our subnet down to 0.1%. And the reason why we asked them to do this is because community trust is really important to us. And we want to make sure that everything, that our subnet is performing to the highest point. We want to have the largest subnet on Bittensor, not just in terms of weight, but during DAO. I'm really excited to talk about DAO or formerly known as DTAO, the implications of that. We want to unequivocally say that there has never been any cheating on our subnet. We will die on this hill. We have never done that. But there have been concerns about that. And so in order to prove that this isn't about us, trying to extract, this is something I reached out to a lot of stakeholders yesterday and asked them, I thought, what do you think about this? And, sanity check. Are we in the right? Or are we in the wrong? And a lot of them thought, this isn't a good look, right? So we want to rebuild, come back even stronger. And so we made this announcement today and called Jake and asked him to do this. Now, this doesn't mean that we're going anywhere. This doesn't mean that we're not admitting any kind of fault here other than the fact that the challenge API needs to be reworked. Our subnet needs to be reworked. We have already talked about version 1.2, the upcoming version here. And that's why we wanted to come on Novelty Search, even before all the hot goss and the tea. That's why, just to get this out of the way, front load it, and then we have a great Novelty Search here for y'all.
I think it's a good idea. Like when the incentives are disaligned on subnets, which just happens, and the reason it happens is because we invented a completely new science of incentive mechanisms, specifically these Bittensor-based incentive mechanisms, and getting them to work is difficult. Like when they work, they're amazing, but they can tend to get into these positions where you start tacking things on to make them work, but maybe you need to you need to really, really rehash them from the ground up. And I think that subnet owners that are in this position where they're like, okay, hey, look, this broke. I think that they should actually call on reduced weights from OTF and other validators. They should be like, this is disaligned. We want to save the inflation of Tau, bring us down, give us space in order to bring this back up. So I think this was the right idea. We did this as well. So like on Subnet 9, when we were building Subnet 9, which is now working really well and no longer affiliated with myself, we had a bug where it was rewarding models that were able to change their architectures so that they could predict the next tokens basically perfectly. And we purposefully lowered the weights on the subnet. Even though we knew it was a good subnet, we were like, the long-term vision for this thing is really good. But like it's producing really great models right now. But I think it's the right thing for leaders and subnet owners to do, to go, okay, hey, look, give me less here for a moment so I can go back into that. And so it's really awesome that you've taken this route here, Rob. Let's do a bit of a postmortem though. Like how can, like, what happened? You went over it really quickly. Like, what happened to the network, and how are we going to go to fixing it for Subnet 4?
How do we go from plateau to exponential, right? It's a great question. And also thank you for allowing me to come on Novelty Search today. I know it was kind of pre-planned before all this, but I really am glad to be able to come here and have a discussion.
Well, we were gonna just talk about DAO and also Subnet 4's like incentive landscapes and like how they matter and how they should be designed. Like that was what we had been talking about. But now I think it's become a much bigger conversation. So we have a lot to talk about. But let's sorry to interrupt you, Rob. Continue where you were.
No, yeah. So when we originally did our subnet, I'm sure everyone is familiar with Sybil.com. We were working on a search engine. We still are working on a search engine, right? But we were having a lot of quality and consistency issues in the first iteration of our subnet. And because we were looking to optimize for consistency in the API, we designed and took from, in conversation with Philanthrope, this tier system. And one of the real big problems with redundant deterministic verification is that inside the data set, there is a seed, or inside the validator code, there's a seed range. And this seed range is very large. So it's hard to guess what that seed's going to be before you receive it, right? But if you know the seed range and you know the data set, this allows you to pre-compute all the correct answers to the data set before so you don't actually have to run a real model or a real miner. You can just use this pre-computed table and then just look up from that table. I was aware of this when I was building it. And so I thought, well, I could just make the data set public and just change the data set very often. That requires a high level of maintenance. And if we drop the ball there at all, then the subnet becomes exploited and that consistency and that quality that we're looking for goes down. And so we wanted to, instead, what we thought of as a lesser two evils is the challenge API. This is an API that just is a simple data set API server where you could just, originally, it was just a GET request. So you would just go to challenge.sybil.com and it would have a slice of the data set there for validators. We started suffering from DDoS attacks on Subnet 4. And so our subnet, our data center that we were hosting challenge at kept on saying, hey, you're getting all these DDoS attacks. We're going to stop hosting you because this bandwidth is way too expensive. So we decided to add a verification. So we look up in the metagraph, okay, is this a validator key? And we're going to be open sourcing challenge API. So everyone will be able to see this and read the code there. But we were able to reduce the number of queries that we were getting by a factor of 4, which was really great. It brought down the bandwidth. It became way easier to detect if someone's trying to DDoS us versus like a real authentic request. But ultimately, what ends up happening is that, it because it's not transparent, it makes it very difficult for people to know whether or not you have access to the challenge API, whether or not you're getting the right data set, all this stuff, right? It allows for a lack of transparency, and this is not good, right? We knew we didn't like it to begin with, but if we had failed on the other side too, where we're not updating the data set enough, right, then it's really going to be detrimental to the API. So fast forward to maybe about 2-3 weeks ago, I noticed that the curve in Subnet 4 is really plateauing. The miners in Subnet 4 are saying, "Hey, we can't make it past immunity." And this is when we decided to start investigating a rewrite of the subnet. So we were thinking, okay, where can we take the subnet? And one of the real things that, we had reached out with other developers and said, okay, we want you to build things on top of Subnet 4 and use this as an API. What we realized is that we need to be able to support things like function calling. We need to be able to support things like image generation. We need to support a lot of these different use cases in AI. And if we were going to do redundant deterministic verification, it's going to be very expensive to run hundreds of models. This isn't really going to work. And so we started looking into, new novel ways of doing like cheap ZK. And we have a really good solution, I think, that we're working on right now. And as a result of that, we wanted to reach out to Jake because Jake had brought up to us that the challenge API, he's not a big fan of it, right? There's in the Subnet 4 chat, people have voiced concerns about the challenge API.
You can talk.
And so,
wait, before you jump past this, Kara, I want to talk about I think this point really requires some attention. And it really it's fundamental to the way in which Bittensor works. We invented a fuzzy consensus mechanism, which allows us to have the broad scale of mechanisms on Bittensor that we see today, from training to data storage to scraping to doing inferences on machine learning models. There is no other consensus algorithm in the world that can do this except Yuma Consensus. I don't know what exists out there. Like, you can do ZKs, but ZKs are really limited. They can't do a lot of things that we can just write in Python code, like a validation process where you query an external API or store into a database or use an S3 bucket. Like, that's unheard of, right? Or like what you guys did with a challenge API. It's impossible. That would be impossible to do inside of like a WASM ZK proof that we could build a consensus on in the chain. But Yuma Consensus gets around this by forcing validators in a proof of stake that have fuzzy perspectives on the state of the world to agree, and they're forced to run the same code as other peers in the network because that's what keeps them in consensus, with the exception of people that go all the way to the center of the consensus, which is weight copying. But that's not really a problem for trying to reach consensus, is having too much consensus. But so anyway, so that's why I see it. It's really powerful and it's very expressive, and it's only transparent if the code is totally viewable by the validators, so that they know that they've reached consensus, even though that you guys have a different perspective than me. It doesn't matter because we reach consensus on something that I can see what I'm reaching consensus on. If they can't even see the thing that they're reaching consensus on, they're running some code they don't even know what they're reaching consensus on, that breaks down the entirety of what Bittensor is, right? You can't have any assurance. It's like staring into a black box. And this creates a ton of questions and concerns. And it leads to a lot of toxicity when people when the mechanism is not totally transparent. So this is what I was calling out before when I first said you need to get rid of this. And thank God you guys are going to get rid of it, hopefully in the next 24 hours, even at 1%. As I understand it, you're getting rid of it in the next 24 hours, right, Kara? There's a plan.
We're working. Yeah. So we have we're working on the script right now. Correct. Now this is actually like a more insecure solution than challenge API in terms of the lookup attack, right? Now, this is why we asked you to drop us down, because we want to make sure that people understand that what really matters to us is Bittensor's long-term value, right? That Bittensor's long-term success. What really matters, like whether it's a challenge API or not, right? Like, we have never done anything like we have never allowed cheating or tried to allow cheating on our subnet, right? And we want to be extra clear about that, right? And we want to prove that. We want to walk the talk. We don't want to just say, oh, we didn't do it and then hope people forget. We never did that. And so we are going to be doing an update, but I want to be very clear that this current iteration of Subnet 4, we will not be, it's like at the end of its life. We're rebuilding Subnet 4's verification mechanism to allow for more functionality, to allow for a better protocol.py file that you can integrate with OpenAI compatible servers. We want to be able to open up the ability to have not just diffusion models, not just language models, but brand new types of models. And this actually gets to, I think this is a great segue into the incentive curve discussion. And what is an optimal incentive curve? Because if you look at a lot of subnets right now, I don't want to pick on anyone in particular because it's not me trying to pick on them, because really when you're first entering your subnet development and you're trying to build, you have something in mind that you're trying to build, right? In Bittensor, really the thing that you're trying to build has to be this second order effect of what you're actually producing. Like it's a side effect, because
right.
if you optimize for that single thing, it's not actually like, if you're a subnet owner, you are not trying to build a product. If you're a subnet owner trying to build a product, then you're gonna get away from what the real job of building a subnet is, which is designing a great game for miners that can be infinitely optimized and gets harder every day. So one of the ways in which we think about this is if we consider something like Hugging Face. New models are uploaded to Hugging Face every day. If you made your game where you have the number one miner in your subnet, and you only would need one UID, right? Because I don't want to get too far ahead. One can run every single model on Hugging Face. They get all the reward, right? So for a miner, it's very simple to increase your incentive. You just run more models. And as more people upload models, it doesn't become stagnant at all. It's not like the game can ever be really solved. You want it to be so simple and easy that anyone can just plug in a box, run the software, and it's there. But you want it to be so hard that even someone like Meta or Microsoft or Google, it would be very challenging and expensive for them to completely dominate the subnet.
This is a really good point, because this is the other aspect of transparency that Bittensor is capable of producing, right? So there's one thing, which is the transparency of the code that the validators are running in their consensus. There's that truth point, right? So we can't undermine that. And the second one is, I think it is highly important, just to touch on what you were saying, it's highly important that the subnet has a very clear metric that is being optimized, and in such a way that that the subnet is performing better over time by optimizing this metric. So then if that thing is continuously being optimized, no one really cares who runs the mining set, because it's an infinitely difficult problem. If you can do it better, hallelujah. And if that thing
exactly,
If that thing has value, even better, right? Well, specifically if it has value, then we need it to have value as well. But that condition is actually even secondary to the need for it to be transparent. If you have a subnet that does nothing, like just proof of work, if we just built, it would be very easy to build a proof of work mechanism on Bittensor as it is today, where you just validate the number of hashes that a miner produces, you'd get Bitcoin. And nobody would ask, hey, is Bitcoin mining fair? Should I be worried if Satoshi Nakamoto is mining Bitcoin, right? No one cares. If he can compete in the competitive market that is one where he produced those hashes, and I can validate that, it really, that's where we can bring the toxicity out of the darkness, you could say, which is when people don't know what's happening. Some people think it's okay. Some people insinuate, and we'll never know that. We'll never know, and that's not good. And so, to in one side, we have to stick with, like, always be sticking with code as a law. But then on the other side, we need to stick with good code, right? Good code that has this quality, that it produces these mechanisms that are transparent at multiple levels of the design. So, but like harkening back to what you guys are thinking of building, like with this space. So like basically this is, I really like that you've given yourself this space. Like, okay, hey, let's drop it here and let's come back up and build something new. You've now become experts in building subnets, right? Because you've been here for a really long time. It's kind of like the subnet game is also, it's a really competitive landscape. It's kind of like the savannah, like you can get killed at any moment. If you last for a long time, there's like Lindy effects for being here for 3 months. Same
I'm so sorry to interrupt. What is a Lindy effect? I've heard people using this like recently.
Oh, Lindy effect is it's this, you could say it's like a law of the world, that things that have existed for a long period of time are more likely to last for a very long time. So if the mountain has been here for a billion years, the likelihood that it disappears tomorrow is a lot smaller than if, hey, this newborn baby was just born, there's a chance that they're going to die. It's the same thing with humans. Like if you've lasted 30 years of your life, the likelihood that you're going to last another 5 is a lot higher than if you're only 3, right? And that's just because the infant mortality rates, right? So it's the same thing with miners on subnets, the same thing with subnets in Bittensor, it's the same thing with cryptocurrencies in general, with stocks. This is value investing. But anyways, that's Lindy. So I think we've over these last 8 months, we actually have developed a fairly amount of like Lindy effects with the core subnets that we have on Bittensor, that specifically when we go to say when we release DAO, that will be signal for people when they're allocating their funds into the ecosystem. It's like, well, this subnet's been around for a while, probably is going to last for a somewhat longer. Anyways, that's what I mean by Lindy, and I'll stop on that. But but we were talking about this quality of mechanisms, and I would say there's a lot of mechanisms that could hear this. It's not just Subnet 4, but like a lot of mechanisms on Bittensor have this quality. And I always tell people when I'm on the subnet calls, when I'm talking to subnet owners, I'm always like, okay, if your mechanism has an incentive landscape that looks like this, it's a plateau, that's bad, because it basically means that you can win the mechanism by having a lot of UIDs. And so then it becomes a UID competition rather than trying to optimize up and to the right. It also, and we spoke about this last time we were talking about just Yuma Consensus. Yuma Consensus itself is not resistant to a flat incentive curve. If all of the miners are the same, then Yuma Consensus can't detect the divergence of the weights between people that are cheating on behalf of their miners and the ones that are actually running the code. So the network itself becomes less transparent in its ability to actually produce a digital commodity, because you don't know, hey, maybe the Open Tensor Foundation is setting weights and running miners. How would I know, right? And that's actually a quality of the statistical distribution of the weights in the network. Like obviously we don't do that, but when we have plateaus, it becomes more possible. And so
Yeah, no, I totally, the one thing that I just want to be hyper clear about is that when something like cheating is happening, this is completely and totally unacceptable. And I want to be very clear here. This is a hill I will die on, right? I will fight tooth and nail. We have never once allowed cheating in our subnet. In fact, we had discussed this very recently about when we had first created the subnet and we blacklist that person, right? That this was not a good thing, right? This was a reactionary. This was a very reactionary thing to do, but it was because we were rejecting what was very obvious to be an exploit, right? Now, that's not the way we now know. We were one of the very first subnets, right? And so we kind of made some of those mistakes for them, right there. And now we know, listen, just make it to where if someone is optimizing, they are optimizing towards this second and third order effect to where, it's producing exactly what you want. But the thing that you're actually doing is different than what you're optimizing, if that makes sense. So this is why we in version 1.2, we want to make it to where the thing that limits people is what limits everyone else. At least, so we focus on model inference, right? And we want to expand the number of models. We want to expand the API. And so what do we need miners to do? We need them to run more more models. More models is going to require more compute. Everyone is constrained by compute. And so we can actually go along a curve and create a curve that looks like that. Mm-hmm. This is the optimal curve, where it's exponential instead of a plateau, right? There are many subnets today, subnet 4 included, where the incentive landscape is plateaued and the competition happens in registration. Now, if you have a bad reg script, you just won't win on those subnets, right? Because it's all optimized about, just registration. And so I just want to be very clear that no form of cheating has happened here, right? We are not doing that at all. And so ultimately, what we had been working on V1.2 and thinking about these ideas and doing research beforehand, right? And we really want to be able to prove to everyone here that what really matters to us is that Bittensor is the very best thing it can be, right? And this is not the end of Subnet 4. It's just the beginning, right? We're Subnet 4, mark my words here, right? Subnet 4 will be the largest subnet on Bittensor. And not just, maybe that's not going to happen in the rootnet right now, but in DAO, Subnet 4 will be the biggest, right? And so, and listen, I know it's a bold thing to say, right? But I know, I look at, but this is what we are aiming for, through developing better and better and better incentive landscapes, we can get there permissionlessly, right? And so we don't have to ask for permission there, and so we want to be just very clear, that we're really looking forward to building V1.2. And Jake, do you have anything to add there?
One thing I think we should talk about here also is, and the reason why I find this very interesting is because Bittensor itself as an organism has gone through this conversation before. We had a mining team at OpenTensor. We decided, hey, OpenTensor should mine our mechanism because the best way to understand it will be on the flip side of the design. And that turned into a dramatic mess for us because it creates a conflict of interest between the mechanism designers and the people that are playing the game. It's like if I'm making Monopoly while I'm playing Monopoly, I'm very likely to just through my own bias make decisions that are not perfectly aligned with the growth of the subnet. And this is why I think, like, if I had a rule for a mechanism on Bittensor when it comes to mining, and I'm just say this to the group, like OpenTensor probably wants to release some rubrics on this. It's unless we feel that the subnet is totally not gameable. And I think a good example of a really not gameable subnet is currently Subnet 9 on Bittensor. If you can go train a foundation model that can reduce the loss on Falcon, that's not cheating. That's just fantastic work. Like TensorPlex may be on the call right now. We know we are extremely confident that it is impossible for that mechanism to be broken currently because of the amount of work and money that's being spent to just produce good models. I think that it's okay for a subnet owner to run into. By the way, I'm not thinking of doing this, but I think that that's when it becomes okay, right? For a mechanism when it's without a shadow of a doubt that there's no potential. It's not kind of like under construction, and I say this because we made this error, right? We decided to create a mining team at OTF. We did it because we needed to fund OTF more. But we were also working on the mechanism, and we tried to keep those things separate, but things just come close to each other by proximity, and this created a lot of distrust. And in the end, it was really bad for OpenTensor, and it was really bad for Bittensor that we did that. And I think I would say this to you, Caro, as well. And I would say this to everyone that is running subnets, that if you are running subnets from now on, when it comes to producing, to getting trust, right, from the community, which I think is the most valuable currency that we have as a community, is trust, right? As a subnet, it's our most valuable currency. Getting people involved and getting people to help you build things better, right? The reason that currency is so important is because it is the lifeblood of a community that works properly. I think that going forward, subnet owners should dox their keys. If you're mining, people should know that you're mining and every single key associated that you're mining. And you should say why you're doing it, and you should be giving that information out, right? I think that is the best stance that every subnet owner should take. It's just the best thing for Bittensor if people do that. And now, look, we didn't actually do that at OTF. So I wish we had, and if I could go back in time, we would do it again. But I think people should dox their keys. I'm just going to say it. Like, I mean, I can't go back in time and change the past, but if I could, I would say this, and heck, I hope that we can do better going forward. So I think I would ask you here on the call as well, Caro, like, will you publicly dox the keys that you guys are mining on your own subnet going forward? And so to build trust with people and also showcase, what are you guys doing? How can you run the subnet properly?
No, yeah, totally. As you're well aware, right? I've been a large miner on Bittensor for a very long time, right? I'm going to be 70 years old. I'm probably used to be mining Bittensor, right?
I'll just interrupt you. I actually think that Caro is the longest consecutive miner on Bittensor. There isn't.
Yeah, it's at this point in our mining operation, right? Like, or at least like on other subnets, I really don't want to release that information, right? Like, I'm like big miner on these certain sort of subnets, right? But I do think that like there isn't, as if you are not cheating, you should be able to mine your subnet, right? Just like everyone else. But it should be transparent. And what I run and what we run on, like, I don't want to say all the subnets we're doing, but I'll say this one, right? Subnet 19, right? Like, Subnet 19 is fully automated, right? Most of our mining setups are fully automated, where they do CI/CD with GitHub and all of this stuff, right? And so we don't deploy any exploits on any of those chains. We don't deploy those sort of things. And so I do think that doxing the keys on Subnet 4 is a really great idea. It's something that, like, in fact, even open sourcing some of the mining code, like the orchestrator, for example, right? Where it sees, oh, it's doing this, like, it runs the Docker container and then boom, it goes, right? And this is something that we've been talking about, like letting other people use for a long time anyways. So it's definitely something that I would like to do. If you are a subnet owner mining your subnet, you should also release this information, right? Because it's definitely not, if you're using your power as a subnet owner to prevent people or to give your mining operation an unfair advantage, this is something that's unacceptable and should not be allowed, right? However, if you are just running your own, the exact same code that you release in the mining, what's it called? In your GitHub, this is, I would say, just as fair a game as any other subnet, right? Like, I don't want to get to a point where it's like, even like, listen, you can't mine subnet 19 anymore. That would be, I like mining subnet 19. It's very easy. And so, I didn't mean to say it in kind of mean way to 19 though. I'm sorry, but because Namare is a great developer, right? A great subnet developer is a great example, right? And so, in order to prove that, we aren't exploiting or extracting, right? This is the one thing that when I touched base with a lot of people about this yesterday and thought like, okay, a sanity check here. Am I crazy? Like, is this wrong? Do you think I'm wrong? Right. And we are not extracting. We are not trying to do anything other than do what's best for the long term of Bittensor. It's really important. Bittensor, I mean, listen, I remember when I found Bittensor in November of 2020 on the 8th page of GitHub, of the GitHub search, right? And I remember joining the Discord for the first time and hopping on a call with you and Alla, and I Parallax and all that, right? Like it was fantastic, right? And ever since that point, the only thing that's really truly mattered is the success of Bittensor, right? And so we don't want to get in the way of the success of Bittensor, or have this sort of impression where we're losing community trust, right? Where people are thinking these bad things about us, right? Like, oh, these guys are just in it for the money, right? We've been here when Tau was at $0, right? And we'll be here when Tau's at $10,000, right? Like, that is not financial advice, but what really matters is rebuilding, continuing to build, and opening up and creating a really great commodity, so that people can build these very complex, coding agents and oh, we need function calling. So it's like, okay, building that, right, is really important.
Where when it comes to Subnet 4 and where you guys are going to take it from here, what is the digital commodity that you think that Bittensor needs the most, and that you guys are going to focus on providing? Like, is it when I spoke to you before, it's and I think you mentioned it on this call, one of the things that you guys were trying to focus on was not just inference speed, but inference consistency, because you were trying to build a front end. And so you held that up, inference consistency, as something that was the most important thing for Bittensor to produce. Does that still stay true going forward? And tell us about why that's your choice.
Yeah, so I think that if we didn't have the tier system, so why did we do the tier system in the first place, right? Or why were we interested in consistency? In November and December, we had issues in our reward model. We were using a reward model back then, right? And the way that we were checking the rewards, right? And it was producing this very inconsistent, low quality responses, right? And we tried all these different things, wasn't working. It's like, okay, well, what's really important to what's important to people who are running and building applications on top of APIs, right? It's that the API always works, It's that it consistently works. It gives you the responses that you're expecting. And so this is why it was like, well, if you over time, over a very long time, have been producing very high, consistent qualities, and also at the same time, we reduce the ability to cheat to where it's very hard. So it's like you can't run a different model, because this was something that people were doing, is they run like a fine-tuned model specifically just to maximize on the reward model, which is like a kind of an advanced form of RLHF. Take it to the extreme. And so what really I think is super important is that it's very hard because of the size of the network, right? Like if it was an unlimited spots, right? The curve you could build up over time, right? But because subnets only have 256 slots, you have to design the game such that it's optimized for that, right? Where you only need one UID to earn if instead of the optimization happening in the registration, the optimization happens in, okay, well, I need to run, if I run 20 more models, it's going to give me this predictably, it's going to give me this amount more incentive, you know? Something I do, and something I want to think about right now, though, is that like, I do think that we'll probably run into a similar issue where like, I don't think that we'll see the plateau. I think that this matters on how you set weights, or like how you construct the weights to be set. So like on our subnet, for example, we do clamping so that like it creates it. The idea is to create more of an S curve, right? But engineering it such that when you set those weights, like it always is going in an exponential way. So instead of optimizing for more keys, you're optimizing for more compute. You're optimizing for running more models. You're optimizing for more storage. And from those things, right, we expect a second order effect of that is that you'll have an API that can run hundreds of models with all different kinds. So it's like you can do image, you can do video, you can do it's one-stop shop for everything. And you only need one miner to do all of those things and receive a high reward.
And what are the things, like what's the breadth here, and what's the dimension through which these miners on Subnet 4 will eventually move into, right? So you're talking about a bit about like almost like a Dirac delta function style incentive landscape, right? Where technically or hypothetically, a single miner could get 100% of incentive if they were 100 times better than everyone else.
Like Subnet 9, exactly.
Positive. So what does that look like for Subnet 4? Like it's like 10,000 models on UID.
Yeah, essentially. Well, I mean, like, I imagine that like people will. Something I've been really thinking about is like it also needs to be based off demand. Like if you're running some like super obscure model like that no one's using, like you don't want to reward that really, right? Like maybe there's some like base reward for like hosting a model, but if also there's a lot of demand for that particular model, hosting that model is really important, right? So if you're a small miner, someone trying to enter the network, right? What should you do? What you want to do as a small miner is probably different than as a large miner, right? Because if you're a small miner, you want to probably run all of those very popular models first so you can get your incentive up, right? But at a point, you're going to say, okay, well, I'm running all the models that are super popular. How can I increase and continue scaling up? And that's where the amount of models will start to matter more, because then it becomes very hard. You know, like there's like this point where it goes from like, you know, okay, you could do this with maybe, you know, an 8 pod. And now it's going to require 800 GPUs. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so it's really important that we design this such that we, as a subnet owner, you are not trying, and I don't even like that term subnet owner. I think that subnet owners really shouldn't exist. I mean, we could talk about this later, but like, or at least like the 18% cut, like we need to get rid of that. But thing that you're a subnet owner is what your real job is to design the best game you can. Not for like this, okay, I'm going to build an API and all the miners will run this API. And then because everyone, if you're running, it's like binary, it's like 0 or 1, right? So I'm running all 4 of these, all these different models, right? And that's exactly what I'm supposed to do. And so boom, there it is. It's just flat, right? There's no way. What can miners do to increase their incentive, right? What can miners do to, it needs to be exactly simple and clear what miners need to do. And so we've been thinking very heavily on what exactly that looks like, right? And this is what we were doing in our V1.2 push that we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks. And so I'm really looking forward to being able to push this, right? And this is also why I asked you to reduce our weight, is because, obviously we know each other very well. But, this is what really matters is that Subnet 4 has the most usage, has the most data, has the most X that you're trying to produce, the most commodity that you're trying to produce, and proving that step by step. So, I'm really looking forward to it. I understand there's a lot of conversation around, okay, should Subnet owners be able to mine? Should Subnet owners be able to run validators? There's a healthy conversation around that.
We can see it in the chat here. We can see it in the chat.
I see it in the chat. Yeah.
It's out of the conversation on the call almost. Would it be valuable for us to open this up to a larger audience on this and solve this right here, right now, about how, like, what we believe as a community is the ethics around mining a subnet? Like, it's a front and center issue. There are people here in the call that matter. Do people want to come up on stage and
I really want to get Bad English T on here, honestly.
You want to get him on?
I want to talk to Bad English T because I think that I want to hear a different perspective from someone who is passionate about Bittensor, but isn't necessarily represented in these groups that we're talking about, if that makes sense. Like, I think that representation there really matters, if he's open to it. If not,
English, we're going to find out if you're actually English.
Yes, because listen, if anyone, he's getting in.
Oh, here it comes.
No, this is sauce right here.
His AirPods. Do it. Arash, I see that you actually posted up here that you mine, and that you've actually given out your exact key.
That's based. But yeah, I don't think that Arash is. I think that Arash is. This is exactly what you need to do, right? Is like, if you're cheating on your subnet to extract POW, this needs to be penalized in the highest way possible, right? We did not do that here. There's no evidence that we did that, and there's nothing that we this is a hill that I'll die on, right? It's like, we did not do that. Jake, you told me you don't think I did that. I appreciate if you said that too.
I don't think you said it. Well, I did. I'll tell I did the analysis myself, and I because Rob's keys were doxed, and they were available to be seen, and so I said, okay, well, hey, let's go see if if this is foul play, and I feel that it looked really bad, and this is why I'm glad that you guys are calling for the weights to be dropped. But if you look at the keys that were associated with the owner key, they're fairly distributed across the incentive curve. It's not like they take the 90th percentile. They're not even the top keys on the subnet. So it begs the question about if somebody was truly cheating with the intention to cheat and take all of the incentive from their their mining landscape. It doesn't really make sense that you wouldn't have the top keys. And so I don't know. There's unknown unknowns. That's the thing. That's
but,
why.
And this is why I asked you to. I'm sorry to interrupt here, but that's exactly why I asked you to reduce our weight, right? Because people don't know, right? They can't tell. I can sit here and I can defend and I can offer all the proof and I can show the weights and I can do the things, right? But the only real way that we're going to get through this, and we're going to get through this, but the way that we're going to get through this is by transparency, by, earning that trust, right? That trust is not given, it's earned. And so, but at the same time, I do unequivocally believe that subnet owners, I understand that some, and this is why I want to get Bad English Tea up here, and someone from more of the community perspective here to expand on, why, I have more of a discussion around how important it is to be transparent. So awesome. He's up on here. Howdy.
Hello.
Howdy.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Hey guys, how you doing?
It's great to talk. It's good to have you here. How are you?
Yeah, absolutely. I know I'm somewhat loud on social media. I am a real person. I think, well, I am actually English. I've just lived in the States for the last 20 years. So you can somewhat...
I hear it just slightly.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a twang. Yeah, hey guys. So, you guys know I'm primarily like a private investor in this. I'd like to think like I, to a degree, voice some of the concerns of some of the other investors in the community, primarily maybe the smaller investors. I think my perspective on all of this is pretty simple. I think there is a desire for fundamental fairness within the ecosystem, not just for subnet owners, validators, miners, but for investors in the token. And I think people that invest in the token, that contribute to the valuation of the project, that contribute to the value of the emissions, I think they just want to see value. And I think there are ways to do that. And I think there have been a number of, as everyone knows, issues with fairness across the network. I have a strong opinion that subnet owners should not be mining. I think it is somewhat unfair to other miners. I think they have an incredible competitive advantage. I've got some other strong opinions, weight recycling and other things. But I'm, again, primarily a private investor, and these are just my opinions. I love this project. I think it has more value than anything else I've ever seen in crypto. I believe that a lot of subnet owners have very good intentions and are trying to build something real and valuable. But yeah, I think, this stuff can get heated and everyone's got a different opinion and everyone's opinion is coming from a different direction. So, yeah.
And that's why I think it's so important to have this conversation and to be transparent, right? I take the stance, obviously, that if you own a subnet, you should be able to run a validator. If you run a subnet, you can mine. But what's really important is that when you're mining, it's very clear, and this is why I think doxing is a good idea. I think it needs to be very clear that it's entirely fair and transparent, right? And I think that there's been some concerns about the challenge API and whether or not that's fair to the miners. And that's why we asked Jake to bring our subnet down while we go through this maintenance, such that. But I do want to say that, in this new version of the subnet, right? I would really like to, if I'm running 100 models, right? and I only have one key because you really only need one key. Let's show people that, right? And see how weights are being set on that key. I think that's a much better, much more fair way of doing it. Transparency here is really important. And that's why, I mean, listen, this isn't easy for me to do, right? Even though I did, I maintain that we never modified the weights. We never changed the code so that it would benefit one miner over the other. In version 1, we learned that from blacklisting. Don't blacklist people, just change your incentive to work, right? Like if you see someone exploiting, like, let's just add their key, right? We did this in October. It's not good, right? We kind of learned that lesson for them, right? I'm glad to be learning this lesson for all the other subnet owners right now, right? And so, ultimately, I think it's just really important that there's transparency. I agree with you, though, that if there isn't transparency around this, right, it's going to create a lot more issues, and it's going to ultimately hurt the network, which is, I don't think anyone wants to do, Yeah,
I mean, completely agree. I think a few things. Like number one, there is a tau emission, but there's a dollar value to that tau. And I think when you add up the dollar value of that tau and you look at how it's being emitted to subnet owners and miners, most of which have significantly lower costs than that tau output, I think there's a overall concern, a concern of value from a lot of investors in the community. And I think one of the reasons I've been pretty vocal about weight recycling is I think there should be some consideration to the dollar value of tau, and that should carry through to, what is being developed, what is being created, and potentially the cost for the miners. I think secondly, I don't know if this is like completely off topic, but I do run like a small, very smart team. We've mined maybe 10 plus of the subnets. I think our experience is it feels gamed. It feels like the subnet owner is dominating. People that were early to those subnets get a kind of consistency or reliability kind of factor in their scores, and they stay on the network while everyone joining or is new has to kind of fight it out for the scraps. I think there's a kind of fundamental knowledge level that the subnet owner has, which gives them this incredible competitive advantage in defining the rules, determining the model, determining the data that goes into that model, determining the fine tuning of that model, that if they are mining, there's really no way that they don't have that competitive advantage, no matter how fair they try and kind of play the game. And then I think thirdly, like just in our experience in looking at potential subnet deployments, I've met with a bunch of really smart teams that kind of have really innovative ideas around potential subnets that could be deployed on the network. And I funded some of those ideas, but in most of those circumstances, the team has kind of somewhat figured out a way that we're not going to game it, but if we were gaming it, this is how we do it. And I think, I don't know if that's like a kind of a design or structure issue with like a fundamental issue with how Bittensor operates, but from my perspective, and again, like I'm just a private investor, you guys are doing all the heavy lifting, you're building subnets, you're innovating, a lot of people are contributing a lot of value, and an opinion, is a dime a dozen. But my opinion is, I think people they want fundamental fairness from the investor perspective, and then have that carry through all the kind of segments of the network, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that, yeah, go ahead, Jake.
I think that this is exactly to my point of why Rob's call for us to lower the weights on the subnet is the right idea. And it's what, even without people calling for subnets to do this themselves, we should, as validators, lower the weights on mechanisms that are inherently not there yet, right? If there's a glaring potential flaw in the mechanism, let's just burn the Tau. And I think that was your call, Bad English, right? Let's set to root. Like, let's actually look if this thing produces value, and because every Tau that is minted unfairly, right? It's like a drop of poison in the bucket, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that we should drop the weights on subnets that there are design flaws that can allow for any toxicity to arise. When they're
absolutely,
if they're growing and like they've gotten past that stage, and this is why whenever I get on a call with new subnet owners, they're always like telling me about the grand vision that they have, and I tell them, like, calm down. Like, the most important thing, the bedrock of the mechanisms, is whether or not they're gameable. Like, it's cool, it produces something of value, maybe only if it's impossible to game. As soon as it becomes gameable, there's just no hope. People will just mine your subnet into oblivion and produce no value whatsoever for Bittensor, and it's a net negative, right?
Yeah.
And also, you were speaking to this at the beginning of the call, Caro, about how the art of incentive mechanism design is you build this engine and the technology is in the engine to produce another technology, right? Like but you don't even necessarily focus on that other technology so much. You focus on the engine that is the meta mechanism to produce the commodity that you want, right? Like, for instance, on 9, it's like we're not training machine learning models. We just have it's an adversarial resistant training mechanism that rewards people for copying other people's models and fine tuning them. You were trying to build Sybil, and Sybil's a product, and so you were trying to build a subnet for Sybil, but it's kind of like the cart before the horse.
Yes, and this is I want to get into this. Yes,
Bittensor subnets should be building a singular, unitary digital commodity and just driving straight in that direction as fast as they can. So, and with no intention of making a fully fledged company, because how could a fully fledged company only rely on a single digital commodity? That's the reason why we have so many subnets, is so that we can actually build these epiphenomenal designs out of a whole bunch of things. And so, when you redesign this mechanism, Caro, and to everyone who's designed their mechanisms, I think it's really important to get down to really, really core. Imagine you're inventing an element of the molecular table, right? Like you're finding a substance in cyberspace that is pure. If you can't explain it in one sentence what you're producing, right? It's like data per second, or storage per dollar, or loss reduction at least costs, or RAG speed, or indexing performance, something like that. There are a lot of subnets that are getting it right. I will say, I'm very optimistic for a lot of these mechanisms really getting it right. But if you can't say it like that, then probably you're wasting Tau for everybody, right? It doesn't matter if you thought it was a great idea. We should have a subnet that is in this domain. Like, oh, wouldn't it be great if Bittensor had this thing? That's the wrong way to think. And I think that because it's not just us that run this, right? So this is my perspective, but it's not just my perspective that matters. We all vote, we all participate, we all have a say. I really want, shout out to Bad English, because he's been very vocal, speaking his mind, and that's been really positive for the ecosystem. I mean, having him up on the stage, having him on Twitter, he's been called out for calling people out, but that's just kind of these are things that happen as a consequence of speaking your mind. You'll tend to make mistakes, but it's better that we have a truthful toxic environment than an untruthful, not toxic one. Like I really believe in that, right? We want to be based. I think bad English is based. So anyways, I'll stop.
No, yeah.
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah. Sorry about what?
Yeah, I mean, no, I just said I'm not sure about I'm being based, but look, I think the overall vision here, it's potentially unlimited. I think from your kind of standard investor who buys the token and creates the valuation, they're looking for value, like tangible value. And I think investors look at this from a dollar perspective. And I think in a lot of ways, Bittensor is a victim of its price appreciation. The speculation on price has driven the value of the token arguably higher than the value, maybe the current value of the network. And I would imagine for the remainder of the year, that's only going to continue because just the narrative around AI is a very powerful market, speculative narrative. I think if you look at the emissions that subnet owners are receiving, I haven't done the math recently, and I haven't actually looked at price recently. But last time I looked, for every 1% of emission that a subnet owner received, they receive about $2 million over the course of a year, which is a run rate of about $180,000 a month, and that is significant. Some people call it revenue. I think it should be called incentive for people to build. I do think there are subnets that are earning 6%, 8%, 10% of those emissions, and the total dollar value of that incentive is pretty large. Giving somebody $1.8 million a month to build something. I do think there is a moment in time when the kind of incentive outpaces the motivational factor for them to build. And I just think in a lot of ways, like your average investor is looking at these dollar sums that are being paid to build these kind of innovations on the network, and maybe Bittensor is outrun, or the price is kind of outrun what is being built on the network. And I think I've advocated for recycling because I think having a brake pedal on the system just makes a lot of sense. If the innovation isn't meeting the kind of valuation, that there should be somewhat of a brake pedal on this system. And that's what I've mostly been vocal about. I'm really not trying to be toxic. I'm not trying to stir things up. I believe transparency. I think I wrongly accused Namare of overselling, and I'm not sure he actually did that. And I'm trying to just be civil, and I'm trying to be a positive voice in the community. I've tried to do as much as I can on the awareness side, and we funded Everett with this documentary, and we're doing some other things. But I'm really I'm primarily a passive private investor, and I'm a big supporter of the network, and I think you guys are doing really amazing things. I just think, the real conversation has to be had about the dollar value emissions of the network. If those dollar values are going to people that are gaming the system or not creating value, that weakens Bittensor as an overall ecosystem. Investors leave the ecosystem and chase something else, and that reduces kind of the flywheel effect that I think the network is going after. So yeah, just some thoughts.
Yeah. No, I think that those are really great thoughts. And I actually, it really highlights a lot of the same. So to give some context here, Jake and I had some discussions around DAO, previously known as DTAO recently. Some of you may know I've been a vocal opponent of DTAO. And he successfully pilled me. Why did he pill me? Right. See, I had already been thinking for a while, I just want to build this really great API that gives very cheap, it's hyper efficient, where we're driving all of these prices to equilibrium or zero, right? Where there's no margin to extract because it's that efficient. This is what a protocol is. And so I feel like these, like the subnet fee, right? I wish I could change the subnet fee and turn it to zero, right? Because whether I'm getting the 18% or not, I'm still going to build Subnet 4, right? Now, at that point, people will probably say, oh, well, if you're mining, then you're going to change the game so that it benefits your mining, right? And that's exactly what DTAO solves. It actually exactly solves that problem. Because now it's not about who owns the subnet key, right? And who's getting the 18%. What matters is community organization. The people who are interested, very similar to Bittensor in its early days, the people who are interested in Bittensor, who are interested in the cross section of AI and crypto, right, will come and they will use the network and build on the network and help develop the network, not because they're earning some 18% fee, but because they really deeply care about it, right? This is what got me into Bittensor and why I've stayed around for so long. Why I've advocated for reducing this is something I'd really like to do still, even today, even before DTAO, I'd like to bring our subnet cuts to 0% because the consistent quality that we have on Civil.com is really great. And I'd like to be able to open that Subnet 4 up to other people, other contributors, right? Having it really be this community-led, community-organized subnet. And that's exactly why, something like the DAO, something like DAO is I think really good for subnet or for subnet owners, because one of the really important things that we see in subnets is incentive alignment. And this is one of the really strong things. I just don't believe that there are going to be companies that are built on Bittensor. Like, I don't think that Bittensor is a Y Combinator. And yet we have all these people who are very only interested in the 18%, like you're describing. Bad English T, can I call you BET? Or Bet. But
yeah, you can call me Ian. It's my name.
Yeah, Ian. There we go.
Yeah.
We like this idea that we can organize together by having something like DAO, formerly known as DTAO, is really important, because like one of my biggest concerns on DTAO was the legality of it, as Manifold, the Manifold is our company, right? Manifold is a research lab. We were very interested in publishing research papers and doing a lot of work there. And so it doesn't make sense for Manifold to be a Bittensor company. There shouldn't be something that's like a Bittensor company. It should just be an efficient, hyper efficient protocol that is community organized and community run. And then this way, you don't have any of these conflicts of interest, or at least you don't have the conflicts of interest in the same way. And so this is why I actually think something like DTAO is really good for Bittensor, and why, Manifold, I don't want Manifold to have a subnet, right? I want there to be the Subnet 4 where we build a hyper efficient, just general AI inference subnet, right? And where someone it's not so it's not so oh well, it's you're earning this and then you're doing that and doing all that. So I actually really think that what you're pointing out here, Ian, is why DTAO is actually very good. It changes the meta really hard, but I actually think that it aligns incentives better.
Yeah, I mean, Cons, I don't know if you want to go. I somewhat agree. I believe there are some maybe fundamental issues with the network in design that may take longer, and DTAO isn't, I think, people openly admit, kind of a single solution that's going to solve every issue with the network. I think it all flows back to fundamental fairness for me, and I think for a lot of investors. I think, and other investors like myself. I think there are, fundamental conflicts of interest that could be avoided on the network for example, validators not assigning weight to subnets that they have an ownership interest in. I understand the perspective from subnet owners that mining their own subnets can provide value. It can provide kind of the threshold that other miners need to compete against. But I think on every subnet that we've attempted to mine and that we are currently mining, there is an incredible competitive advantage, and it's a competitive advantage in lots of ways that the subnet owner has over miners. I think the network is, it's valued at like billions of dollars, and that's kind of crazy. But crypto does these crazy things with valuation. But I just don't think, from what I see in subnet deployments, and as I said, I have a small team that are looking at subnets every single day. There is a kind of, at this moment in time, the value the subnets are creating doesn't match the valuation of the network, which is, I think, again, just purely an investor perspective. And I know most people that are building on the network, they don't necessarily look at it from the investor's perspective, because maybe you shouldn't look at it from the investor perspective. But I think that's just where a lot of my concerns kind of originate from. And, I know I'm vocal on Twitter about that, but I also believe that detail, I like market-based solutions to things. I think, whales may manipulate it. There are going to be some pumps and dumps. I think there are still going to be issues there, but I support like the advancement. I know you guys are doing kind of incredible work in trying to fix some of these big issues, identify the issues, come up with big ideas and big solutions. And I know everyone in the community appreciates that. Even just the people that I chat with on a daily basis know like how like fundamentally revolutionary Bittensor could be if it is able to kind of achieve the vision. And I think that's why a lot of people are willing to make this, crazy valuation speculative bet on Bittensor today, because tomorrow or the next month or the next year or the next few years, if Bittensor is able to solve these problems, and whether detail and a market-based, valuation model actually works, then I think, it's unlimited in potential, but it's going to take time to get there, I guess. And I think, that's why we invest in these crazy ideas, because they're big and they may not work, but yeah.
And it's really important to say that, the entire community, from every slice of it, is really important to the conversation, right? These are not easy conversations to have, but that's exactly why we have to do them, right? And I really appreciate you coming up here today, and Jake, obviously, thank you for letting us get together here, because this is something that, like, Bittensor is something that we all in here. If you're here right now in this Discord, you've been here for an hour, and you've been watching and listening to us speak, you really care about Bittensor, right? And everyone in here really cares about Bittensor, the success of Bittensor, right? And this is why I these conversations and having everyone participate is really important.
And let's end on that note, Caro. And Ian, thanks for coming up on the stage. I think this was a positive call.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm out of here.
Likewise.
You'll see him on Twitter complaining about something.
Good.
Let's see that.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to the call, and see you next week. We'll talk more about how we're actually delivering on that. It's going to be next week. It's going to be we're speaking to Subnet One and the Macrocosmos team, which are running some of the most performant subnets on Bittensor. So really looking forward to talking to them. But obviously, of course, Caro, thanks for coming up on the stage and doing the right thing here. Talk soon.
Awesome. Thank you.